The accusation came at 2:58 a.m. when even the skyscraper seemed asleep. The finance floor was a skeleton of cubicles lit by the pale glow of idle screens. I was finalizing petty cash entries that no one would ever notice when the elevator doors opened. Two men in black jackets stepped out, their footsteps heavy against the polished floor. Chen Yuhan. My name didn't sound like mine in their mouths. I stood before I thought to. The taller one flashed a badge, head of security. The other stayed silent, eyes scanning like I was already guilty. They didn't bring me to HR. They led me to a boardroom I had only ever glimpsed from the hallway. At the far end sat Li Jianhua. Even in the hour when the city is most exhausted, he radiated control. Behind him, Shanghai's skyline shimmered through floor-to-ceiling glass, sharp as shards of glass scattered across velvet. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. Li Jianhua was a man who radiated power and control. He was a man of consequence, and he knew it. I have admired him far. Who hasn't in the office? But I had never spoken to him before, of course. How could I? A lowly accountant ever have a chance to speak to the CEO? But now I was sitting across from him. He quietly slid a folder open. Photographs spilled like evidence in a trial already decided. Me at the server room door, me leaving with a hand in my coat pocket, red boxes marking my face. Timestamps, aligned too neatly like teeth in a trap. I knew they were false. Badge logs could prove I'd been at my desk, noodle cup open, spreadsheet running. But truth is cheap when your bank account holds 37 when and your mother's treatment bills rise by the hour. He spoke once, softly, as though the weight of the city bent to it. The penalties will not be minor. Another folder. Market-sensitive files. Enough to end me. I thought of my mother's chemo calendar. Each line another battle I was losing. I thought of the debt, the numbers that had already devoured hope. Jail would not kill me. It would kill her. Then he offered the solution. A contract marriage. In exchange, my freedom, my mother's treatment, and every bill paid off without question. It should have sounded like madness. Instead, it sounded like inevitability. The terms were clinical, non-disclosure clauses, rules for public appearances, and one line that burned, formal bonding within 24 hours. I wanted to refuse, but his certainty left no space for refusal. He had already decided the shape of my life. I was only catching up. The pen was heavy in my hand. The signature I laid down didn't feel like mine. When it was done, he checked the pages as if reviewing a quarterly report, then closed the folder with a click that sealed more than paper. The clock read 3:14 a.m. My name had been rewritten into his ledger. By dawn, I was delivered to a black car waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door with a bow. And just like that, the first act of my life ended, and another began. One written in his hand. Not mine. The Civil Affairs Bureau had been paperwork and polite stamps, efficient, clinical, almost surreal. But what came next could not be mistaken for bureaucracy. The next evening, as the contract dictated, I stood ready to take the Alpha's mark. The penthouse lights were dimmed, the city glittering below us like scattered glass. Li Jianhua stood in his trademark black suit. He looked as composed as always, a man who had never once surrendered control. I stood opposite him, heart hammering, the contract still burning in my mind. This wasn't about documents now. This was about the mark, the bond, the part no law recognized, yet every Alpha and Omega understood. "Step forward," Li Jinhua said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of inevitability. I did. My legs moved, like I'd been wound up by someone else's hand. He touched my jaw, tilting my head with precision. "You understand," he murmured. "Once done, it cannot be undone." I didn't answer. Silence was the only dignity left. His breath warmed the side of my neck. Then pain, sharp, searing, absolute. His teeth pierced skin and muscle, and with it came the flood. Alpha pheromones thick as smoke. Dominance pressing down like gravity. Emotions not mine, forcing their way into me. I staggered, gripping the edge of the table. My body shook as the bond locked in. Suddenly I could feel him, not just his presence, but his intent. Cold satisfaction, relentless certainty, ownership dressed as protection. He steadied me, one hand firm on my shoulder, as though he hadn't just rewritten the architecture of my existence. "It's done," he said, voice low and final. Blood trickled hot beneath my collar. The mark pulsed with every heartbeat, already claiming me as his. Days blurred after that. My every need was met before I voiced it. Meals arrived plated like offerings. Drivers waited by the curb, escorts ensuring I never wandered far. My mother's treatments were paid for, arranged by schedules I hadn't seen. Even her transport was handled, as though my role as a son had been quietly outsourced. Freedom came wrapped in silk chains. Nights were worse. In the quiet, I could feel the bond pulsing, tugging, reminding me that part of me no longer belonged to me. Sometimes in the dark, I could sense him, my alpha, even when he was in another room. His focus, his emotions, the steady hum of his presence beneath my skin. The penthouse was vast, but my own body felt like a cage. It began like a storm building over the horizon. At first, subtle shifts I might have dismissed, if not for the bond. His scent sharpened, filling the air with something rawer, more desperate than the usual sandalwood polish of control. His voice, when he spoke, carried an edge I hadn't heard before. By the third day, the penthouse was heavy with it. Heat clung to the walls, thick enough to choke. He shut himself in his study, the door locked, but the bond carried every tremor of his struggle straight into me. The fever under his skin, the tightening coil of instinct demanding release. "Stay in your room," he'd told me, "no matter what you hear." But the bond was merciless. Distance became agony. My chest burned, my body recognizing his need as though it were my own. My biology betrayed me, pulling me toward the source of the fire even as my mind screamed to resist. By midnight, the silence broke. A crash echoed down the hall, furniture striking the wall, his breath ragged, his voice raw. My name torn from him like a plea. "Yuhan, please." I pressed my back to the door, shaking, but the bond carried his suffering in waves, fever, pain, the spiraling loss of control. It was more than desperation. It was the certainty that he was burning alive. I couldn't ignore it. Not when I could feel it inside my own body. The lock clicked beneath my hand before I realized what I'd done. He was crumpled against the opposite wall, sweat soaking his shirt, pupils blown wide, until his irises were thin rings of storm gray. His hands shook where they gripped the floor, as if sheer willpower could hold back biology. "Go back," he rasped. "I can't control—" But the bond pulled me forward step by step. until I was within reach of his trembling hands. Not pity, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or myself. Choice. Something in him shattered. His hands caught my face, desperate and reverent all at once, as though I were both salvation and sin. His scent crashed over me, and my body betrayed me fully. Heat sparking through veins, every nerve tuned to his need. What followed wasn't violence, it wasn't tenderness either, it was inevitability. Biology written into us both, pulling us into a rhythm older than thought. He touched me like I was fragile, yet claimed me like I was already his. The bond sang with it, no longer a chain but a current dragging us under together. When the fever finally broke, he collapsed beside me, his breath slowing, body heavy with exhaustion. His arm draped over me, protective even in sleep. I should have felt used, violated. Instead, I felt chosen. The next morning, I wandered through the penthouse, half in a daze, half in denial. My body still felt the echo of the night before, the mark throbbing, the bond humming under my skin. In his study, a drawer stood open. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Inside were folders, photographs, and notes. My life laid out in cold detail, what time I left the office, where I shopped for cheap dinners, even which hospital corridor I lingered in before visiting my mother. Every step, every habit, every exhaustion mapped with precision. Rage cut through the fog. He had been watching me long before this, the days after the rut blurred into silence. I avoided his gaze when he came home, ate meals mechanically, and tried not to feel the weight of the bond thrumming through my veins. But the discovery of those surveillance files gnawed at me. It came to a head one night. He found me standing by the window of the penthouse, the city glowing far below, the folder of photographs still clutched in my hand. "You watched me for months," I said, my voice raw. "Every move, every routine. You trapped me before I even knew I was in a game." He didn't deny it. Instead, he walked closer, the bond pulling tight between us. "I had to," he said quietly, "because I couldn't lose you again." I demanded an explanation, and that's when the truth spilled out. His voice was low, steady, but threaded with something fragile. "When I was 16, they cornered me behind the gym. No one came. Not the friends I thought I had, not the teachers who should have been there. No one, except you. A boy I didn't know. You threw yourself into the middle of it, distracted them long enough for me to escape. You even tied your scarf around my arm when it was bleeding. And then you left before anyone could thank you." My breath caught. The memory was faint, buried under years of exhaustion and survival, but I remembered the scarf, the cold night, a boy with terror in his eyes. He stepped closer, his gaze unyielding now. "The next day I tried to pay you. You refused. Said it wasn't about money. That was the first time in my life someone had looked at me and not seen a bank account." Silence stretched between us. The city outside hummed like static. "All of this," I whispered. "Everything you've done. It's because of that one night?" His jaw tightened, but the bond pulsed with raw honesty. "Yes, because you proved there was something in this world I couldn't buy. And I've been chasing it ever since." I wanted to scream at him, to hate him for the cage he'd built around me. But underneath the rage was something more dangerous. A memory that refused to stay buried. The truth that he wasn't just a tycoon with cold eyes and endless power. He was also the boy I'd once saved without thinking. And he had never forgotten. The night of the surveillance reveal left a bruise on the air between us. I couldn't look at him without remembering the files, photos, logs, timestamps, the months of invisible eyes cataloging my existence. And yet, when he spoke of that night in school, when he said he'd carried the memory of a stranger's scarf pressed to a wound, something in me fractured. I wanted to hate him. I did hate him. For the trap, the contract, the cage I lived in. But the hatred was no longer clean. It was tangled with the image of a boy I'd almost forgotten, terrified and bleeding, who had seen me not as a nobody, but as salvation. Days passed in that uneasy silence. The penthouse grew smaller even as its windows overlooked half the city. He hovered without words, presence filling every corner like a storm that never broke. Sometimes I caught his gaze softening when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes the bond hummed with emotions I didn't want to name. I told myself I was surviving. I told myself I was enduring. Until the morning, everything changed. I had woken with nausea that clung through the day, a bone-deep exhaustion no sleep could fix. I told myself it was stress, bad food, anything but what I feared. Still, when I stood in the bathroom holding the test I already knew, 2 pink lines stared back, sharp as a verdict. My knees nearly gave way. The counter became an anchor as I fought to breathe, pregnant. The word throbbed louder than the city beyond the glass walls. Proof that what had started as coercion had rooted itself in me, binding us in ways even the contract had not dared. When I finally stepped out, he was in the kitchen, tie already knotted, tablet balanced beside his coffee. I set the test down next to his cup. No words, just evidence. The silence that followed was heavier than any threat he'd ever spoken. His fingers twitched, then stilled. The tablet slid from his grip and clattered against the marble. He picked up the test like it was glass, studied the lines, and for once, his composure cracked. Shock, fear, and beneath them both, unmistakable hope. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "How long have you known?" "5 minutes," I whispered. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. His scent shifted, warm and unguarded, flooding the bond with raw emotion. "What do you want to do?" For the first time since this began, he wasn't commanding, wasn't orchestrating. He was waiting. The choice was mine. And to my own surprise, I found the answer rising before the fear could stop it. "I want to keep it." The relief that crashed through him was so strong I staggered under it. His hand closed over mine, not with dominance, but with reverence. For once, the cage felt less like bars and more like arms. After the storm of revelations, the silence between us changed. It no longer pressed like suffocation, but lingered like something unfinished, waiting. He was different now. The commands that once defined him softened into questions. The cold precision gave way to quiet gestures, a hand steadying me when I faltered, a blanket drawn over me when I fell asleep on the sofa. He never said the word, but the bond carried it in waves. Fear, hope, need. I should have walked away. But when I pressed a hand against my stomach and felt the faintest thrum of new life, I understood why I hadn't. One night, as the city lights burned like 1,000 watchful eyes beyond the glass, I faced him. "If I stay," I said, "it won't be because you forced me. It will be because I choose to." For a long moment he didn't move. Then his composure cracked, and his hand trembled when it brushed my cheek. His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. "Then choose me." Not as my prisoner, as my equal, he said. The bond hummed. No longer a chain, but a thread pulling us closer. For the first time, I leaned into his touch, not out of resignation, but out of choice. And when he kissed me, it wasn't ownership. It was surrender from both of us. In the depth of my heart, I had already decided he is my alpha and I his omega.